Dragger, an original novel by Robert Napier, narration and images powered by AI. Chapter 12, One Way Out. Morning pierced the sparse and odorous courtyard. The steady buzz of flies was broken by Aunt Ruby, her voice echoing through the compound. "After them! Hurry up! Hurry, you ingrates!" Dex flashed awake. Runty was still beneath her, patient as always. How long had she slept? She rubbed her eyes, trying to make sense of the blotches busy in her vision. Sliding off Runty's back, she saw the guards prodding sleepy gores out of their stalls, and Torpor pulled by the steel rings in their noses. Pusher and Shover were dragged out of their wallows, though Dex was sure all the guards and war ghouls in Gnarlstead couldn't budge a full-grown gore. But the animals were conditioned since birth to obey. Obedience was even bred into them. Slowly they came, under the shouts and lashes of the handlers. Dex bolted out of the sty. She saw men and women, callows and war ghouls running crisscross the yard. Ruby spotted her in the doorway, staring like a hapless lamb. "Dex, I hoped you crawled off and died somewhere." "Well, don't just stand there. Hurry up." "Aunt Ruby, what's the matter?" "I'll tell you what the matter is. While you were bickering with your brother and snoring like a buffalo, those two slaves you begged for have run off." "Are you sure?" Ruby marched over and slapped Dex across the face. "As sure as you're a mouthy runt. The callows are leading this hunt. Lucky for you, it's good practice. For them, I can get them back, Aunt Ruby. I know I can," Dex pleaded, wiping the sting from her cheeks. Her stomach ached at what the callows would do when they caught them. Callows were especially cruel if they thought Father would find out. "You? Huh, I don't think so. You better clean those stalls by feeding time, or there'll be storms." Dex had to think fast. It wasn't very original, but vanity always worked on Aunt Ruby. "You trained us real good, the best. I'm sure we can have those bastards back in no time. Please let me make it up to you, Auntie. You deserve." Dex fumbled with her words, not sure what Ruby deserved. "You deserve good children who make things right for you." Ruby was suspicious. There was always something wrong with that child. Not had she aimed Ruby uncomfortable. She'd never tolerate that, but just didn't feel right. And Dragger always calling her Piglet and keeping her around despite her worthlessness. It pissed Ruby off every time she had to look at those sickening brown eyes and centipedes in her hair. "All right, I'll have Vago clean the stalls this time. That's work befitting the vanquished. You go with the others. One last chance to justify yourself. If you don't come back with their heads on a stick, go and bury yourself in a bog." The sun glared on the sharp boulders that littered the Junlin moors. In the way, bones pierced the withering hide of a decaying corpse. A craggy ridge emerged atop a ferny hill. From there, the callows of Gnarlstead were seen jaunting across the moor. Two rillers, shrouded in mottled cloaks, peered over the edge of the summit. One of the raiders raised a longbow and pointed it at the band unawares, but the second grabbed the arm before the arrow was loosed. The riverine raiders approached two large runkas, standing tied to a knotted tree. They mounted and rode off down the rugged bluff. Dex scratched the bristly snout of the chunky animal. "Shover is the biggest gore in Gnarlstead, probably in history," said Dex mostly to herself. Since she spent so much time alone, she found it hard to tell whether she was thinking or speaking. "Except for the gigantic gore," said Graven. He was sitting behind Bludge on the gore's back. "That Father slew." "He's nowhere near as big as that," said Agotha, the youngest besides Dex, who was walking on the other side of the snout. "How do you know how big it was? Were you there?" asked Cringe. "He was riding Pusher along with Ixolingo." "By the tusks, dummy," answered Graven, not standing up for Agotha, but defending his own earlier comment. "Father wears them, remember?" "Oh yeah, Father has so many trophies." "You would too if you trained more," said Agotha. "Shut your bog," commanded Graven. I bet you win all the little bitch trophies." The land got softer and softer, but the Gores were adept at finding footing amid the heath-covered ground. They constantly switched between sniffing the air and the grass. This was the first time any Callows had ridden the Gores, though the beasts' backs were more than broad enough to sit 2 or 3 people. It was uncomfortably wide in some places and sharp in others, but the Gores were better hunters than any hound. The only problem was that there was very little chance for them to learn the scent of the runaway slaves. Aunt Ruby decided she could justify the cost of the slaves by turning this into training, said Murmur. All she cares about is justifying herself to Father. Gradually, flowering grasses gave way to reedy pools, hugging the knees of knotted trees. Agatha was just a few feet away, but Dex only caught glimpses of her through the fog. She could hear her, though, keeping time to their sloshing march by singing a shotery rhyme. V toe to rose, stomp the toes, and hit the nose. Her voice was soft but strained. Dex could hear the tinge of worry in her throat. She was trying to comfort herself as they went further and further from home. V toe to rose, strike the blows, and shoot the bows. There's no telling how long this training will take, said Graven, with his head flopping back and mouth wide. There are no standards for chasing runaways. It rarely happens in the first place, and when it does, they either come back cold and starving or are never heard from again. Well, somehow, they had a fire going. We all saw the smoke, but why would they head toward the swamps rather than the Lauren grasslands? Asked Cringe. V toe to rose, slay the foes, and feed the crows. Regardless, you have to cross a stretch of moor, said Murmur in his distinctive rasp. Yeah, but the swamps are full of death and evil. Why would anyone go there? V toe to rose. Nothing grows if no one sows. Panicking, maybe? The war ghouls think the trail is a diversion or a trap, said Murmur. V toe to rose. How we chose you, no one knows. So they send us to chase the smoke while they go to Lauren. They're harder to replace. That's how Ruby will justify this to Father. Drop it, said Bludge, the first he'd spoken since they left. They dropped it. As they trudged deeper into the moor, the ground bulged and sucked at every step. You named it? Said Murmur quietly. It took Dex a while to realize he was asking her about Shover. Oh, I guess so. Why? That's pointless, said Agatha. You're weird. You're only here because you beat Vago. Dex didn't have any justification. She just shrugged. She was an excellent shrugger. He had it coming, said Bludge approvingly. Cringe looked down at her from the Gore's back, and Dex reluctantly met his gaze. She preferred to avoid attention when possible, but had a compulsion to lock eyes with anyone. Cringe grinned as he swayed with Pusher's gait. We'll have to reevaluate you. Mid-stride, Shover shuffled sideways, whether to avoid a mossy bog or sharp rock, or no reason at all. Agatha was caught inattentive and bounced off his massive head. She stumbled, but didn't fall. I hate Gores. You see that? Even the Gores can't stand your shrieking, said Cringe. Your pet tried to kill me. Graven laughed. If one of these things tried to kill you, you'd be dead. Right, Bludge? Father killed one that was much bigger. Yeah, but Graven didn't bother finishing. It wasn't worth arguing with Bludge. This time, Pusher moved off course. He trotted ahead and then slowed again, almost playing. The Gores were steered by a combination of spurs, halter, bit, nose ring, and pigstick. Even then, they traveled with an unmistakable zigzag, especially when hunting. It was infuriating and time-consuming to travel, but led them, invariably, to their quarry. Who's steering this thing? Complained Cringe, twisting the reins ineffectually. Gores go wherever they want, said Murmur. Ah, that's bog rot. I'll show you how, said Graven, essentially daring Cringe to give up control to him. He was tired of sitting behind Bludge. He was too bulky to see around. Not that there was anything to see, except rolling hills curving upward on all sides, and thick yellow-green foliage. and ahead of them loomed the gloomy curve of the moor, knotted by sinister ridges. "You think you're steering the gore, but it's steering you," said Murmur, in a tone suggesting he didn't care how the riders felt about it. "Who is master?" "I'm the master. I got the reins, don't I?" said Cringe with finality. "You're just the driver," said Graven. "The driver works for the passenger." Graven crossed his arms triumphantly. He had outwitted Cringe, and in the processes had given a little compliment to the girl he thought was Swango. She was sitting behind Cringe, but they had almost forgotten she was there since she didn't talk anymore. But she was still pretty and skillful. Ixulingo did not react, except her eyes shot towards the other driver. Graven swallowed hard when he realized he had implied Bludge was his servant. Bludge just laughed. Obviously, he was in charge, no matter where you were sitting. Dex, by no means a tracker, began to sense that they were lost. She wasn't listening to the banter. She was fretting more about her fight with Vago and the consequences of the lost slaves, rather than observing her surroundings. As they rode on, the moors were silent, except for the occasional skitter of fleeing animals they never saw. In this oppressive silence, the echo of distant voices barely pierced their perception, yet it was unmistakable. That's when they all realized the Gores had been dutifully following a trail, but not to the escaped slaves. Instead, the Gores had led them to the Sawjaw slavers. The caravan was still moving, but very slowly over the uneven terrain. It was no surprise they had caught up with them, though they had left much later. The swamp wagon was bulky and not well balanced. The Runkas strained to haul it through a nasty, wet mire. 4 or 5 Sawjaws helped turn the wheels. Others pulled the horses' bridles. All activity halted when they saw the Gores and Callows coming up behind them. The wagon groaned before sinking back into a rut. The lanky salesman Dex had seen before was the first to approach. Bludge steered Shover closer while gesturing for the others to stop. "Greetings," the salesman said with a slight bow. "A chance meeting on the moor. How may I assist?" It wasn't clear if he was offering assistance or wondering how they were going to help him. "We're on official business," said Bludge. "2 fugitives, fleeing their post. We know nothing of this. We go." He waved to the 4 or 5 Sawjaws, turning the wheels to press on. They made every appearance of working, but to no avail. Dex wondered if one of them was Vegas. "I bet Shover could move that cart. No problem," she said, coming forward. Bludge stayed her with a gesture. "These 2 fugitives," he said, putting one leg up on Shover's back to sit a little to one side. "They're the slaves Aunt Ruby bought from you yesterday. Did you ever have any trouble with them? They ever try to run before?" No. Shojin no slavers. We find. We give work. We know Lord Dragger most generous. No need for run. So you don't know anything about them? Nothing that might help us. It's dangerous out here. We just want them to come home safe." "Safe? Yes. We go." The salesman waved, and there was something frantic in his gesture. "I think your wagon is too heavy." "Yes. Most sorry," said the salesman. Bludge pointed at the mired vehicle. "You got more passengers in there. Or is it just you all?" "Just we all. No passengers. You all camp out here last night? On the moor?" "Yes. We camp." "All of you together?" "Yes. We all." The salesman patted the workers on their backs. They kept their heads down and pushed hard. "Did you have yourself a fire?" No. Nothing burns on the moor. Too wet. Much smoke. That's the strange thing. We saw smoke out here this morning. In fact, that's how we come to this chance meeting, as you say." Dex was increasingly uncomfortable with Bludge's questions, though he smiled and scratched his head as if genuinely confused. She had never heard him speak so much, but it was clear he enjoyed everyone listening to him. "You know, little Dex gave me an idea. I bet one of our Gores is more than strong enough to move that wagon for you." "Generous? Most. But we go." See, the wagon hadn't moved. "We're neighbors, right? You help us, bringing supplies and workers. What kind of neighbors would we be if we left you stuck out here in the mud?" Bludge motioned for Graven to dismount. He did so instantly, followed by Cringe and Ixolingo. Bludge used his stick to tap Shover on the cheek. The animal moved forward alongside the wagon, just a little nudge to get things moving. He spurred Shover's flank with a quick snap of his heel. The massive gore lurched forward, and with a grunt, sent the wagon barreling onto its side. The Runka horses were brought down with the cart, their three-toed hooves going into the air. The Sawjaws scattered to avoid the wreck. The wagon split like a ripe lump melon under its own weight. "I'm not fucking around," growled Bludge as he leaped off the gore's back. "Somebody lit that fire. Somebody knows where they are. I want them now." The Sawjaws huddled together. No weapon was drawn, but there was no doubt they had them, concealed in their heavy brown cloaks. If there had been any passengers in the wagon, they would have been exposed by the crash. That meant there were 7 Sawjaws and 6 Callows. Well, 7 if you counted Dex, but no one did. The Callows didn't hesitate to ready their swords and daggers. The Sawjaws were not known as warriors, but the 7 looked like they could handle themselves, and somewhere in there was Vegas. All but the salesman had been silent thus far. Only their orange eyes showed under their she-mouths. "You know what I think," said Bludge, marching up and down. "I think those slaves were Joe Zen spies, and you helped them, not just to get into our home, but also to sneak out. I don't know why or how, and I don't care. What I care about is finding them. You helped me do that, like good fucking neighbors, and I'll do what I can to explain this misunderstanding to Lord Dragger." The salesman began to speak, but was cut short by a shriek. The entire gathering startled and turned toward the gurgling howl. The Sawjaw that stood the furthest back clasped his chest. A bloodied blade protruded from his heart. Before any realized what was happening, the blade scraped free from the ribcage, letting the corpse drop. It was Ixolingo, her teeth grinding and her eyes wild. She had moved unnoticed around the wagon. She turned sharply on the next Sawjaw and pounced on him like a feral cat. She plunged the dagger into his chest and throat repeatedly, sending up thick spray that was black in the fog. "Fuck!" The other Callows rushed in. The Sawjaws threw off their cloaks, exposing bent and spiny blades and clubs. The Callows were young, but they had trained for this. Ixolingo had turned the odds in their favor. Murmur and Cringe went for the one on the left, while Graven and Agatha retreated to draw the other Sawjaws apart. Bludge wielded a broadsword as easily as a pigstick. He drove straight at the salesman. Dex had the sentry sword, but was reluctant to draw it out. She didn't understand how things had turned so horrible so fast. She trained for years for this very thing, and at this moment, all she could do was wish herself away. In an instant, 2 more Sawjaws were dead. Graven was bleeding down his arm, and Bludge was spattered with gore. 3 more were pushed back against the smashed wagon, their weapons gone. Bludge ordered Cringe and Murmur to hold them at sword point while he cleaned his blade on one of their cloaks. Dex couldn't look away from Ixolingo, panting heavily, staring into the fog, as if admiring herself in a mirror. The warm blood soaking her tunic was steaming like egg soup, and her body appeared to be transforming into mist. "Look, it's Dex's boyfriend," squealed Agatha. Pulling away their scarves, the Sawjaws' faces were revealed. The 3 could have been brothers, but Vegas was unmistakable, with intensely orange eyes and pale lips. Bludge looked at Dex, then at Vegas. "What are you talking about?" "I saw them," said Agatha. "I bet she's a spy." "Yeah, right, Dex the spy." "Shut up. I'm not a spy," blurted Dex, which was the first thing any spy would say. Of course, Agatha was only saying so to tease her. No one seriously thought the Gorstye girl was any kind of spy. "Then you should kill him," said Murmur, in a tone suggesting he didn't care whether she did or not. "No, enough killing. There's no reason for any of this. They don't know anything. Maybe she's right. I don't know if Father would like this." "Come on, Dex," said Cringe, putting his arm around her shoulder. "You finally beat Vago. When Father finds out, he'll let you train with us. Let's just kill this swamp trash and go home. It made Dex uneasy. She had never been praised or encouraged by any of them. And even more troubling, Cringe was looking at her like he looked at Agatha and Ixulingo. What about the slaves and spies? Said Graven. They were clearly a part of this. It was a setup, said Agatha. It could be a coincidence, added Murmur. No, said Dex. She stood between Bludge and Vegas. Bludge was almost 2 heads taller than her and cast a shadow over the others. They were nice to me. They were nice. She repeated for emphasis, but the Callows were unmoved by her argument. She turned to Vegas, who had fear and anger and sorrow in his eyes, but didn't speak. Say funny things, please. Remember, just Dex and... She wanted to pull on his arm to get him going, but withdrew, ashamed to touch him. Now, I think we understand each other a little better. Let me ask again. Bludge lifted one of the sawjaws off the ground and shook him hard. The other travelers tried to rise, but were met with boots and pommels. Who were those strangers? Why did you bring them here? We make trade. We go, pleaded the man, limp in Bludge's hands. No, nothing. Bludge nodded to Cringe and Murmur. They started kicking Vegas and the other against the underbelly of the overturned wagon. They were dazed and could barely hold their arms over their heads and faces as blows rained down on them. Do they know something? Huh? They know. You think we're stupid? Murmur was bored before Cringe. He shook his head, not at the violence, but at the wasted effort. You see conspiracy everywhere, he said to Bludge. I'm done. He went to bring back the gores that had wandered off to root at the base of a strangler tree. The Callows stood over the bodies. Are they dead? Might as well be. Father won't like this. They attacked us. Ambush. It was a setup. Right here. Swamp trash. From amid the tangled mass of sawjaws and swamp grass, a hand appeared, pale and bent, waving feebly. Dex gasped. It was Vegas, dying and beautiful, even with blood and boot prints smeared across his face. He smiled at the sight of her, a familiar face at least. Dex grabbed his scarf and pulled him onto her lap as best she could, her knees sinking in the moss and mud. Give hand, he rasped. Dex pushed her hand in his. She squeezed his fingers, and he squeezed back, but his grip was weak. In a fast but smooth motion, Vegas lifted her hand to his mouth and firmly bit down on her palm below her pinky. It happened before she could realize the strangeness of the gesture. It didn't hurt, but the heat of his breath made her body shudder. When he released her, she saw he had passed his small pouch of murk root into her hand. When she looked back at him, his eyes rolled and his head dropped. No, she whimpered. No. Graven put his hand on her shoulder and she viciously swatted him for it. No, he was nice to me. And though she didn't understand what was happening, she started to cry uncontrollably, bawling and wailing in a way she had never allowed herself before. This is stupid, she screamed, shaking Vegas up and down. You're destined for greatness. You're destined for greatness. Don't be stupid. But he was dead. Dex gurgled and sobbed. Through her mass of black hair, her eyes pleaded with the others for some kind of answer to a question she hadn't conceived yet. Told you, sneered Agatha. Dex touched him last, said Cringe. It's her kill. He calculated it was better to give her the questionable credit for slaying the last survivor. In case Father would be mad, there was no one to interrogate. Come on, Dex, said Graven, helping her up from the mud. Let's go home. You're really one of us now. We won't tell Father you cried. The others patted her on the back. Cringe, Graven, and Murmur, Bludge, and even Agatha. Not the cleanest kill ever, said Cringe. She's still young after all, said Murmur. Even Crux was 16 before his first. Dex was numb with horror, guilt, and confusion. Her stomach felt upside down with her heart throbbing in her throat. It made no sense to cry over some swamper. And here, at last, were the friends and family she wanted so badly. Why did she hate them and love Vegas? It was stupid and senseless. Over and over, she rubbed her hand, where she could still feel the pink marks of his bite. This time, Graven mounted Shover. and Dex was seated behind him. Bludge mounted Pusher, and would only accept the girl he thought was Swango to ride along with him. The 7 Callows turned towards Gnarlstead.
Hello, listener. My name is Robert Napier. I just wanted to say thank you for your support. If you enjoy this content or have suggestions on how to improve on it, please leave a like or comment. It would mean a lot, and I'd really appreciate it. There's still much more to experience in the dark world of Dragger. Consider subscribing so you never miss an episode. Thank you.